We reject the ideology of globalism, and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism.
Not only will this tax plan pay for itself, but it will pay down debt.
There are moral and legal obligation questions that I think we'll have to wrestle with as a society.
When we as people go wobbly on the truth, we go wobbly on America.
All you have to do is look at the numbers, look at what we've done.
And this is only the beginning.
From 100.9 FM WXIR, this is Evidence of Design, and I'm your host, Jason Taylor. Evidence of Design is a live talk show about the political economy. We critique income and wealth inequality and support democratic values. Thank you for listening, and welcome. Indeed, welcome to Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. It is Saturday, September 19th. My name is Jason Taylor, your host of Evidence of Design, and I'm joined in the WXIR studios by my good friends and co-hosts, Matt Treadwell.
Good morning.
And Mary Lawrence.
Good morning.
For those new to Evidence of Design, we critique economic inequality. Why is there so much economic inequality in our society, and what are its effects? That is the aim of our show, and thank you for tuning in to your local, grassroots, independent media station of WXIR. Again, we're live for you on Saturday, September 19th. We have a full show packed today. So we're talking about a few things, first of which we'll be covering a report released by the Rand Corporation that details just how much the vast majority of Americans have been left behind by the economy. If we, as in, the bottom 90% of income earners in the United States, if we were making as much today as we were making right after World War II in the 50s and 60s, the median income in the United States would be effectively doubled. The average income in the United States, the median, not the mean, the median income in the U.S. would be around $100,000. And the reason why our incomes are so low comparatively, according to the report released by the Rand Corporation, and I would agree with their findings as well, as we've discussed on this show, is that we live in a winner-take-all economy where free market capitalism is valued more than other things in society, and therefore, hey, if you can amass all of the political and economic power for yourself, go be it. That means you're smart. That means you're a hard worker. That means you're doing the right thing. We will start off the show by just quickly going over the results of the report. We will deal with that in a full episode in the coming weeks, because we have more timely fish to fry, I suppose, on the show today, and that is talking about the Rochester Police Department and a report released by Deputy Mayor James P. Smith, along with the 323 pages of documents released in the initial internal investigation from the mayor's office into the RPD. So we will be talking about how evidence suggests that the Rochester Police Department has a culture of insularity that has colored its handling of the Daniel Prude case. We will lay out some evidence that shows, in our opinion, how the RPD looked out for its own internal interests, more of the interests of the people it's supposedly existing to protect and serve, especially Mr. Daniel Prude, who was suffering from a mental health crisis. We'll go into several pieces of evidence that were released in the report and show how we think, again, this is another example where we should value, human lives more so than private interests. Whether that's the culture of policing, whether it's the culture of the economy, we need to put human lives and social well-being at the forefront of things that value and matter in our society. And we'll close out the hour talking about the death of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She passed away yesterday at the age of 87 due to cancer, and we'll talk about a little bit of her legacy and also what that means for the future of the Supreme Court. President Trump and Mitch McConnell have already vowed to fill that seat. For those who remember from 2016, Mitch McConnell infamously denied President Obama his opportunity to nominate someone to the Supreme Court, even though he had 10 months left in his presidency. Now, Donald Trump has potentially 2 months left in his presidency, but Mitch McConnell is, of course, being a hypocrite because he cares nothing besides his own, well, self-interests, as we've already discussed, more so than, the interest of our democratic society, and therefore he's already saying that he will ram through a third Trump appointee for the Supreme Court as soon as possible, hopefully within the next 2 months before the election. So 3 things to talk about: the Rand Corporation report, the RPD, culture of insularity, and also the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We want to hear your thoughts throughout this hour, though. You can give us a call at 585-219-8889. Again, that's 585-219-8889. Your voice matters on Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR. Matt, Mary, let's start with the report that was just released this week by the Rand Corporation. They're a nonprofit. Some folks might have remembered the Rand Corporation from way back in the 1970s, where, they had journalists, the journalist who was working on what eventually became the Pentagon Papers that detailed how, a series of presidential administrations lied to the American people about the war in Vietnam. That journalist worked originally for the Rand Corporation, and so that might be a familiar name to people. Long story short, they're a nonprofit, and they released a report this week detailing how around 90% of Americans have been left behind by our winner-take-all economy. So right now, a full-time worker with taxable income, our median full-time taxable income is around $50,000 a year in the United States. So median worker, full-time taxable income, around $50,000 a year. Were our economy to be as equally, were our economy to be as equitable as it was in the periods immediately following World War II, the median income in the United States would be around $100,000 as opposed to $50,000. So basically, what's going on? Our profitability is increasing. We're not getting, our productivity is not decreasing. We're not getting less productive as a society, as an economy. Our technology increases, we work harder, our productivity increases over time. We have better technology, we have more efficiencies, so on and so forth. And so we as a society and an economy are being more productive, and therefore you would think you would then have more money. That's kind of the basic theory of capitalism. You get more money, the more productive you are. So what's going on? Why has the incomes of the vast majority of Americans not increased as much as it should have over the past 50 years? According to the Rand Corporation's report, they write that by and large, it's because of failed policy decisions, such as allowing the value of the minimum wage to deteriorate, such as not protecting various worker rights and benefits, such as health care or overtime coverage, such as having failed policy decisions undermine labor law and union protections, and such as, most importantly, valuing the interests of shareholders and stockholders more so than any other interests. We've extensively written about this before, or talked about this before on this show. Milton Friedman was a famous economist who was really the godfather of modern capitalist theory, and it's the theory of maximizing shareholder value. That's kind of the world we've been living in over the past 50 years, which says, the business of business is business. Business have no obligation to look into anything other than their own profits. It's normal and natural for people to be self-interested, and therefore, that's the way society should work. And that leads a direct result to have our quality of life, to have the structures in our society be lessened and weakened and, reduced. And so this report by the Rand Corporation reveals, among other things, again, we will cover this in more, but someone who worked on this report, his name is Nick Hanauer. Folks might have seen him if you're tuned into the economic inequality sphere. He's a billionaire venture venture capitalist. He's described himself as a zillionaire because he's basically someone who's incredibly rich. He's a member of the 1%, but who critiques his own wealth. And he's been urging for the government to take a more active role in ensuring an equitable distribution of income and wealth. So he argues there's zero reason for me to be a billionaire. Why the heck are you not taxing me? Why the heck are you allowing people and corporations to reap in so much profit? Why is Jeff Bezos worth, at least a few weeks ago, $200 billion? It's a stupid amount of money, and he writes, quote, "This inequality explains almost everything. It explains why people are so pissed off. It explains why they are so economically precarious. And indeed, that is the whole point of our show. We believe that so much of the problems that we have in our society is due to economic inequality. And we need to do something about it, and there are things we can do. Unfortunately, neither President Trump nor Democratic nominee Joe Biden seem to talk all that much about economic inequality. Joe Biden a little more so, but that's why we are frustrated by an overall lack of attention paid to economic inequality, because above all, most politicians still believe in the free market capitalism rhetoric, and that is a huge, huge problem. People are working hard, they're playing by the so-called rules, and yet at the end of the day, we are still not getting ahead. Indeed, we're falling farther and farther behind as we work to struggle to pay for college, to pay for car, to pay for health care, so on and so on and so on. We need to change our policy to make sure that our society and our economy works more for human beings more so than the interests of money. We will cover that RAND Corporation report and more. For now, though, we will turn our attention to the RPD and what we would echo the words of Deputy Mayor James P. Smith, what seems to suggest a culture of insularity at the RPD. We'll go over several, key pieces of evidence from the report that was released by the Deputy Mayor this past Monday, and also those that reveal kind of internal documents, depositions, emails, so on and so forth, that reveal, the RPD seem to have not valued Mr. Prude's life as much as they perhaps should, and they seem to have worked in their own interests more than the interests of the society they are sworn to protect and serve. We'll get to that right after a short break. Hang on.
Zombie by Fela Kuti.
And this is, I love Fela Kuti. This is Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. You're welcome to give us a call throughout the hour at 585-219-8889. Again, that's 585-219-8889. What are your thoughts about the calls for racial justice and police reform in Rochester? We want to hear from you. 585-219-8889. Right now we're going to be talking about the report released this past Monday by Deputy Mayor James P. Smith that detailed his wishes to reform the RPD. Again, there's a lot of perhaps inside baseball here where it's hard to know what the mayor's office knew when they knew it, and so this report could be seen by critics of it to be a too little too late trying to save face type of report, where it's like, oh yeah, we knew this was wrong the whole time, and now we're coming out with something just to say, all of these things really need to be done because now the proverbial crap has hit the fan and we need to do something about this. So folks can look at it that way from a critical lens, and either way, you can see this report as laying out what seems to be pretty important steps that we could do to reform the RPD. I would argue some of them still don't go far enough, but the most important one that we want to argue about today is this so-called culture of insularity. That is the words of Deputy Mayor James P. Smith in his report, but we will kind of echo those words too and talk about them and expand them ourselves. This culture of insularity at the RPD that we think colored its handling of the case to make it seem as if when they were, handling Daniel Prude and all of the events that took place after that, to make it seem like the RPD was doing everything to the letter of the law, and that is all fine, and whatever the letter of the law is just fine, and therefore there's nothing to see here, folks. There's nothing wrong. We were doing our job as we were trained to do.
Yeah, as Mike Mazzio in the Locust Club would have you believe.
Yeah, he's the president of the Locust Club who said, look, nothing to see here, folks. The officers followed their training to the T, and therefore, if you got a problem with the training, you got to take it up with the training. Don't take it up with our officers, which is a really, really intellectually lazy argument. Obviously, protesters are calling for changing police training, right? And so... And obviously, police training is created by...
Well, many of them are calling for more than that. They're calling for the defunding of the police.
Yeah, absolutely. A re-articulation of what it means to police in society. Absolutely. And so, protesters are calling for, among other things, at least, changing training, i.e. changing what policing means. And so, yes, we get the point, Mr. Mazzio, that the problem is with the training. Thank you very much. And by the way, training is made by police officers.
Just to highlight this, there was a really interesting moment during a press conference a little earlier in the protests, I think maybe the third or fourth day before Singletary was resigned and then was fired, where he was asked, if you had officers who were dispatched to a call very, very similar to that of Daniel Prude, would they react any differently, and how would they react? And he didn't have a solid answer. So I think this really highlights exactly what you're saying, that this response is a little bit too late and too little, in that, the police department at least does not have the excuse that they didn't know what had happened, and they weren't actively working to figure out a different way to respond to this kind of situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, again, what we're talking about is the report released by Deputy Mayor James P. Smith. If you Google RPD report, it'll come up for you. You can also go to the city's website and find it there as well. But again, this is the report released this past Monday. Deputy Mayor James P. Smith, an internal investigation by the mayor's office into the RPD's handling of the Daniel Prude case. Among the 10-page report from the deputy mayor, there's also 323 pages of documents and communications by the RPD. Folks might have seen this, make it all the way up to the New York Times, etc., about how the RPD and the city's law department worked to cover up the Daniel Prude case and kick the can down the road. Our current acting police chief, was it Mark Simmons, I believe?
Yeah,
Mark Simmons was one of the people involved. His statements have come out through the reports, and he said, look, we don't want this to get out because it certainly would make us look bad and people could interpret it the wrong way.
He said he didn't want people to find out about Daniel Prude's killing and conflate it with other killings of unarmed black Americans across the country that had sparked similar protests, like the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor.
Right, and people would interpret it the wrong way. I mean,
What was the right way to interpret it, just out of curiosity?
It was his fault.
Yeah, make Daniel Prude a suspect, right? That whole thing that's been gaining a lot of media
It was a drug
attention.
overdose.
Right.
And he was resisting arrest.
And he was a criminal because he smashed windows.
Yeah,
that whole thing. So, I certainly don't promote people taking substances that cause harm to their bodies. I certainly don't promote people smashing windows, whether they're under the influence of drugs or not. But this doesn't make Daniel Prude's murder any more or less a problem, right? There's no reason Daniel Prude had to die that day, and this is what we're talking about. And if you watch how it happened, you don't need 3 officers to restrain someone who's already in handcuffs, who's already suffering from mental health crisis, and who already has a spit sock over his head.
And if you're reaching for reasons why it's acceptable that Daniel Prude died on that night, I think you need to re-examine your principles.
Totally. Yeah, yeah, right. You can watch the video. You do not need an officer to put their full body weight into your face into the ground for 3.5 minutes.
While you're naked.
In handcuffs, wearing a spit sock. These are three grown men pressing their body weight into one other grown man. It's like, that's a problem. And we should be okay talking about how that's a problem. And if the officers are trained to do that, then that's a problem. And we should change the training, or, it's probably not just changing the training. We don't go into the curriculum and say, hey guys, so don't press people's faces into the ground as we've been doing for months. It's got to be broader than that, right? You're not scratching out one sentence or two and changing it to something else. It's a much larger systemic issue, and that's what we're talking about. That's what the energy is going on in Rochester. That's what the larger rhetoric is about Black Lives Matter and, defund the police. That's what the focus is.
I mean, like, this, I think, gets back to the problem with police reform and retraining, where it's like, 6 years ago we were talking about illegal chokeholds.
Right.
It's like, all right, we banned chokeholds, but you're still, like, literally pressing people's faces into the ground until they can't breathe anymore. It's the same problem. It's just a different maneuver.
Yeah. How many times does someone have to say, I can't breathe? I don't understand it. So stop doing that to human beings. Stop. Especially if they're not being a threat to you. Stop doing that. Stop suffocating people to death. Stop doing it. I don't get it, So just, like, at a bare minimum, can we change that part of the police training where it says don't do that to people? And okay, so let's move on from there, though. Well, let's move on from the idea that we should stop suffocating people to death from a police department whose job it is to protect and serve people. It's very frustrating.
I think that is being very generous, though, to say that they were meant to protect and serve people. That, maybe that's not how things are in reality. I mean, I think that we're seeing that police are meant to protect property.
Yeah.
And not people.
And, so I wanted to sort of get to this later, but there's no need to build up to a crescendo. Yeah, Mary, I completely agree with you. We've talked last week on the show how, the police department, through my lens, through a more critical Marxist lens, views the police. The thin blue line that the police are protecting us from is the so-called threat that would happen were our current capitalist system to collapse. Meaning, were our current capitalist system one that values private property more than human lives? Oh golly, what would happen to us were that system to collapse? The terror and the anarchy that would come. I'm being sarcastic here. And so, I agree that where I think this rhetoric of defund the police comes from, where I think so much anger is directed towards the police, is because there are so many parts of our society that are fundamentally broken, and this directly connects to how we started off the episode with the Rand Report, where we live in a society that values money and profits and capitalism more than it values, human beings. And so when anger is directed at the police, it's both literally directed at the police, human beings who are doing unhelpful things to other human beings, and a very obvious example of that is suffocating people to death repeatedly for no reason. But there's a much larger and important and a really important metaphorical argument directed towards the police, is that the police are the people who are defending an unjust system. The police are the people whose job it is to maintain the status quo. And if the police's training is to maintain the status quo, and the status quo is fundamentally broken, then the police obviously represent a problem with our
society. It's like an occupational force.
Indeed. They are the occupational force then. And we must have nuance here. I'm not saying all police officers are bad. I don't believe that. I'm not saying we do not need law enforcement. I personally don't believe that. I'm all for having some form of a police department. And I have very many other friends who disagree with me on that, and that's totally fine. I'm saying in principle, I do not think there's anything wrong with having some form of, peacekeeping force in society. But I would imagine that to be much, much different than our modern police department. And so, to get to your point, Mary, when it comes to kind of this thin blue line with police and what they're for, the anger directed at police is both their literal sense and also the metaphorical sense of that our society is fundamentally broken, and why are police defending this broken society and indeed contributing through it with their actions. And just a reminder, folks, that you too can share what your thoughts are by giving us a call at 585-219-8889. Again, this is Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. Give us a call at 585-219-8889. Let's turn our attention now to some of the specific pieces of the report released by Deputy Mayor James P. Smith this past Monday.
Yeah, could I'd just like to preface this discussion by directly quoting Deputy Mayor James P. Smith's report, and in it he wrote, quote, "The records reveal a culture," the records meaning the 323 pages that were released along with the 10-page report that Mr. Smith wrote. "The records reveal a culture of insularity, acceptance, and quite frankly callousness that permeates the Rochester Police Department. From the cavalier and unsympathetic attitude displayed by the officers present at the mental hygiene arrest, to the investigators in the major crimes unit and the professional standards section who seemingly saw nothing wrong after reviewing the body-worn camera footage, to the police chief and his command staff who continued to describe the death of Mr. Prude as the result of an overdose and, quote, resisting arrest, end quote, even after the medical examiner ruled it a homicide and the video showed Mr. Prude did not resist his arrest," end quote. So, as you mentioned earlier, Jason, the New York Times wrote an article referencing this report earlier this week, and they sort of focused on all of the sort of steps that both the Rochester Police Department and other affiliated, not necessarily members of the Rochester Police Department, but people within their orbit took in order to prevent the footage of Daniel Prude's killing being released to the public. But something that you and I sort of were very struck by when we were looking at it earlier this week was this accusation that Deputy Mayor Smith is leveling at the department, the Rochester Police Department, that there's this insular culture that is informing every step of this process, from the initial arrest and killing of Daniel Prude to everything that was handled after it. And I find that really interesting because I think it articulates very well this problem of modern policing and why so many people are fed up with it and feel that it needs to be, just remade on a structural level.
Completely agree. Yeah, there's this disconnect between what the lens of the badge is versus the lens of society is. The lens of the badge says everything's all right. We followed our training to the law. No excessive force was used, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The lens of society says, how is there no problem here? Like, what's going on? How can we deem this acceptable? So, Matt, you just read, a statement from Deputy Mayor James P. Smith, and he says, all of these things show how there are issues with the RPD's handling of Daniel Prude's case. Well, let's look at some evidence of what the police frames their handling of the case as. So the day of the incident, way back on March 23rd, Commanding Officer Lieutenant Stephen Sweatman wrote to then Police Chief Laron Singletary, quote, "Upon review of the current information available relative to this incident, there is no evidence to suggest any excessive force or misconduct on part of the officers. The evidence on its face supports that the involved officers acted appropriately to keep Mr. Prude from standing up and continuing to spit at officers." That's on page 65 of the documents that were released. So, if you think it's appropriate for 3 grown men to force another grown man's body into the ground while that one grown man is handcuffed and wearing a spit sock while naked in the winter, then I disagree with your view of normal and non-excessive.
What's acceptable.
Right. So I disagree with that. So here on the day of the incident, the RPD is saying no excessive force was used. Everything's fine.
And how many of those people had seen the footage? I mean, was that from hearsay or was that from actually seeing what had happened?
I think that Commanding Officer Lieutenant Stephen Sweatman there was writing in reference to the footage he saw.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, let's continue on that timeline. So again, there's the sort of the day of the incident. Here's a commanding officer reviewing the case. Let's continue on to what then became a internal investigation, because once once Mr. Prude had died and once it was labeled a homicide, I believe, if I got my timeline correct, the RPD initiated an internal review. And so there's RPD Special Investigator Zenilovic, in his summary that he writes of the RPD's handling of the case, he writes that the officers had to use, quote, minimal force to keep Prude on the ground. He writes that Prude was, quote, stabilized, end quote, until a short time later until, quote, a short time later when officers noticed that Prude had apparently stopped breathing. So that writing there, that framing, how officers had to use minimal force, again, spit sock, handcuffs, 3 men pressing someone to the ground, is not my definition of minimal force.
I mean, the way it's phrased, it seems to suggest that Daniel Prude's loss of consciousness and the fact that he had stopped breathing is totally unrelated to the fact that restraint was used.
Exactly. And that's the big key, is that it's just like, oh, Daniel Prude happened to stop breathing. And of course the RPD was blaming that more on drugs than it was on the officer's actions. Special Investigator Zenilovic writes that Mr. Prude was, quote, stabilized. And if your definition of stabilized is, again, handcuffs, spit sock, 3 police officers pressing your body to the ground, then okay. And also, yes, Matt, the big one for me too is that, officers noticed Prude had apparently stopped breathing. Well,
we didn't do that. That's unrelated.
It was a force of nature. Yes. Here's the account now from Officer Vaughn. This is the officer who was the one sort of, as he would frame it, segmenting Mr. Prude's head on the ground, the one who was in the push-up position on Mr. Prude's head for over 2.5 minutes. He said that he stopped pressing Mr. Prude's face into the ground until he, quote, became calm. And later on, he said, quote, at which point it appeared that Mr. Prude was not breathing.
That's some definition of calm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Matt, you and I were talking about this yesterday, how horribly grim and sad and this is when, if your definition of someone becoming calm is when they've stopped breathing, then I also disagree with your interpretation of reality. It's very sad and hard to read this stuff. This is the officer's firsthand account of his actions. And, Mr. Prude's also wearing a spit sock, so it's hard to see what his facial expressions are. But one need not see someone's facial expressions when you're pressing their face into the ground for more than 2.5 minutes.
There's just nothing you can say, right? Like we shouldn't be having to I guess contrast the officers' reports of their actions with the footage that we've all now seen. It's just it's like 2 different worlds. It's entirely unconscionable, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. It is 2 different worlds, yeah. I mean, and this is, again, we're talking about how the RPD is framing its handling of the Prude case through in the words of Deputy Mayor James P. Smith, a, quote, culture of insularity, and how they view the world through the lens of their badge as opposed to through the lens of society, which, Matt, you're saying is, how we as sort of citizens would view the footage when we look at it. If you give it to any reasonable and prudent person, I think that they're not going to say, that was okay. Mr. Prude was showing excessive force and he needed to be restrained in the manner that he was restrained. Most people would say that's a problem. And so that's kind of, this is why this issue is here. I want to highlight just one more piece of evidence for the sake of time from the report. This one really sticks out to me. So we know now that the medical examiner, of course, ruled Mr. Prude's death as a homicide because of, quote, complications of asphyxia in the setting of physical restraint. The medical examiner also noted contributing factors were that Mr. Prude was high on PCP at the time of the event. So again, medical examiner rules it a homicide and says the primary cause is complications of asphyxia in the setting of physical restraint. That's a fancy way of saying he was choked to death by police officers. And so on page 105 of the documents that were released, there is a really interesting email written by then Police Chief LaRon Singletary to Mayor Lovely Warren's office. There's a lot to get in here. I'll just focus on one aspect of it. He was writing it to Justin Raj, I think he's still the Chief of Communications for the mayor's office. He writes then Police Chief LaRon Singletary, he says, "Hey, Justin, da-da-da," and then the quote is, "Today, the medical examiner's office ruled on Prude's death and determined such to be a homicide with the below attributing factors: PCP in his system per toxicology reports, excited delirium, and resisting arrest."
So he didn't even mention the primary cause.
Well, he changed it to resisting arrest.
Right. So not only did then Police Chief LaRon Singletary reorder the causes of death, but he skewed what the medical examiner wrote. Again, the medical examiner wrote, and it's very clear, this is also in the report, that Mr. Prude's death was a homicide from, quote, complications of asphyxia in the setting of physical restraint. Police Chief LaRon Singletary writes, it was a homicide, but...
He reorders them first to prioritize the idea that Daniel Prude's death was caused mainly by his drug use, and then he places blame on Daniel Prude, saying he was resisting arrest, not that he was physically restrained in an unsafe way.
Right. That is a very powerful email, and there's a lot more to get into that. He talks about how the mayor's in the loop since, he says the mayor has been in on the loop since March 23rd. He says, "I'm just waiting for the mayor to call me to give her the update on the medical examiner's ruling." So, Mayor Warren says she didn't know about the case until August, but...
Well, she hadn't seen the video until August. Yeah,
she hadn't seen the video. Well, I guess maybe you can give her credit for not knowing what happened if LaRon Singletary really is lying in this way. So, this is an issue. That's not what the medical examiner wrote, and to say Mr. Prude was resisting arrest is simply untrue. To anyone who watched the video, the moment the officer shows up, I think Vaughn or Talladay, I don't know, he immediately pulls out his taser, points it at Mr. Prude. He says, "Get on the ground, hands behind your back." Mr. Prude does it immediately, hands behind his back, handcuffed. Certainly Mr. Prude is, shouting things and sort of being agitated, but he is suffering from mental health crisis, and therefore shouting things and being agitated is normal for mental health crisis, and it's not
also
evidence of...
It's just never grounds to murder somebody.
Yeah, and so it's not resisting arrest. And when the officers moved to restrain Mr. Prude was when he went from his prone position into a seated position and went to stand up. Then they spent 3.5 minutes pressing his body into the ground until he suffocated to death. And so there's just the training, the culture. There's no reason to do that to another human being. He was not a threat to someone. He already had the spit sock on his head at the moment. At the time, he was already handcuffed. Why are you doing this to another human being who's suffering from a mental health crisis? And so, yes.
Why is he on the ground naked still?
Yeah, put him in the police car. Done. Problem solved. And just so there's a million different things. Coulda, shoulda, woulda. But the point is, Mary, to what you brought up earlier, when then Police Chief LaRon Singletary was asked, well, if RPD had to respond to a similar situation today, would anything change? And he doesn't have a good answer. Well, that's what we're fighting for, is to make sure that we have a better answer. Because there are things that we can do to change that. Just like at the start of the hour, we're talking about how our economy is fundamentally broken. The winner-take-all economy serves the needs of the wealthy more so than it serves the needs of the people. There's things that we can do to change that. We don't just have to sort of, shrug our shoulders and say, this is the way it is.
This is the way it's always been.
It's always been this way. There are things we can do to change that.
And it certainly always has not been this way. It's very short-sighted to say that. And I think in this case there is a lot that the police department could do as you said, at a minimum to change is draining. But it is also one of the very good reasons that reform isn't enough.
Yep. Yeah, and so, these calls to defund the police, there's a lot of ways to define that. The point is, policing must change in the modern United States, and so too should other institutions. What your thoughts are on this, we would love to hear by giving us a call at 585-219-8889. Again, that's 585-219-8889. You're listening to Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester, Rochester's extreme independent radio station. You can give us a call at 585-219-8889. Speaking of which, we do have someone on the line. Hello, you're on Evidence of Design. What's on your mind?
Hey, this is Aaron from Queens, calling in with another special guest, Jeff from Webster. Yeah, Aaron from Queens and Jeff from Webster calling in, and we just wanted to know, I normally call in and have, extended 10, 15-hour-long rants about various topics, but when you say policing must change, what must it change to? What does your vision of policing look like after your ideal reforms, whatever they may be?
Yeah, thanks for calling, Aaron from Queens, Jeff from Webster. Always great to hear from the both of you. I've said already on the air that I think that I'm not opposed to having police officers or a police department in some fashion. This is not my wheelhouse. I will definitely leave it to other organizers and folks who actually think about this, folks in the criminal justice system or field scholars in that way. With that being said, my own top-of-the-head opinions, I would love it if we had more triaged supports to people. So in the instance from Mr. Prude, suffering from mental health crisis, I would love it if we had trained mental health professionals to respond to mental health crises, for instance. I would love it if there were traffic violations or traffic incidents happening, if we need to enforce those things, that we don't have armed officers doing them. I would love it that if police officers were not used as a multi-tool to fix society's problems. So much of what police officers do police officers are called to fight problems of poverty, and police officers are the least helpful thing to fight problems of poverty because they are the ones upholding the system that creates rampant poverty, meaning excess capitalism. So stop sending a police officer to deal with problems that are mainly caused from poverty. Social workers, I don't know, other people like that. I think police officers are a good response when there is someone who is posing an imminent threat of danger to society. Heaven forbid those things happen. We just went through a shooting last night in Rochester, near the public market. Unfortunately, things like that happen in society, and we need people who can use force to stop force. That's my belief. And so that could be a legitimate use of policing. Otherwise, I would love to see our society be rearticulated to support root causes of issues and support people as human beings rather than trying to so-called enforce law and order. Because if law and order is enforcing a society that is inherently unjust, then your definition of law and order is not one that I agree with.
Go ahead, Mary.
Just the other note about that we haven't invoked this term yet today of public safety, and the building that police officers are quote unquote protecting or have been protecting throughout many of these protests is the public safety building in Rochester. And so the question that we're facing and the organizers are facing as we come up against the police department is, what does it mean to have a safe public, and how can we create true public safety? The police department is obviously not answering that question in an appropriate way. They are violence workers, as Jason said, and that is only in an appropriate response in very few situations. Many of the situations that they respond to do not require a violent response. And so for those, we need to think about what public safety means in that case. What does it mean when you're responding to a mental health crisis? What does it mean when you're responding to poverty? And how can we expand social safety nets? How can we create support systems for our public that truly create a safe public instead of just imposing violence when it's not needed.
Yeah. So I, in terms of the value of policing and should it be allowed to continue, I do sort of wonder. I do think that we need some kind of, like Jason said, I think we do need some force or organization in our society that is equipped to handle serious threats. I mean, Christopher A. Wray, the director of the FBI, just said this week that the most dangerous terroristic threat posed to the U.S. is violent extremists, many of them being white supremacists that are living in the U.S. I think that perhaps the need for such a force would be much less apparent if we had, stricter gun laws across the nation and just more regulation in general in regards to the sale and use of deadly weapons. But there was a concept that came across earlier this week while reading an article on NPR involving the removal of a statue of a former slave owner in a town called Bristol. And at one point, the article mentioned this idea of policing by consent, which is sort of unique to British policing, at least in regards to American policing. And essentially what policing by consent is that the police force in Great Britain understands that their ability to police and sort of govern effectively is wholly determined by the public's faith and trust in them as an organization. And so they prioritize the safety and sort of support of the public over following the law to the letter of the law. And that was one of the reasons given why when protesters tore down the statue of the slave owner, police just sat by and let them do it because they were prioritizing the safety of the community. They didn't want to get involved and start a confrontation that they felt could turn violent. Where you see the response that even in Rochester that we've had to protesters where, at 11 o'clock, the police are like, this is now an illegal protest, disperse, and then they start firing tear gas. Even earlier than that. Yeah. And they start firing tear gas, which is an abortifacient. Is that how you pronounce it? It's a chemical weapon that is outlawed by the UN, and they're using it on our own citizens. I mean, the absolute disconnect between what police are supposed to do, protect and serve, versus what they're actually doing.
And also the sound cannon, the LRAD that the police have deployed in Rochester, and the dogs. There's been reports this week from National Guard leaders who testified to Congress about how the National Guard was in cooperation with the military and the White House to figure out what weapons to stockpile and what munitions to use against the protesters in Washington, D.C. And, they were and that's when the Trump administration and National Guard and military flew the Black Hawk helicopters very low over the ground. They were talking about deploying a heat ray weapon that's been around for a while, but it makes it feel like your skin is on fire. The LRAD, the sound cannon, can cause permanent deafness. These are people, these are not anarchists, rioters, looters, as Tucker Carlson would love to make you believe, because Tucker Carlson is not the greatest human being who exists. So just like, why is this culture out there?
No, these are, in Rochester in particular, these organizers are the people who are trying to redefine public safety. Every night, when you go out to the protests, people aren't showing up. Some people show up ready to fight, but for the most part, people are showing up ready to support a new system and to show that a new system is necessary. And the organizers have ideas about how that can be done. And they want to get into negotiations to be able to change the system that we have. It's not, it is not a war. It shouldn't be anyway, but that is what it's starting to look like.
Yeah, there should. We live in a pluralistic society where trust is really important. Let's go back to the Enlightenment 400 to 500 years ago, well, less 300 to 400 years ago, where in order for society to function, we need to make sure that we can trust in other people to treat each other the way they want to be treated. It's as simple as that. It's literally first grade. Treat each other the way they want to be treated. And so, there's so many different examples to go to. Gosh dang it, I'm going to go to Mitch McConnell. If Mitch McConnell says, we're not going to take up Obama's Supreme Court nomination, but then it comes to Trump and he's like, no, we can do this, even though it's in a shorter time frame, and even though Trump has had lower poll ratings than Obama at any time, he's not treating people the way that they want to be treated. And what that causes is anger. And what that causes is violence. When we have so much poverty and in the winner-take-all economy, we're not treating other people the way that they ought to be treated. And so what recourse do you have?
The fabric of society is woven through what we call the social contract. That is sort of faith and trust in institutions that govern us. When you disrupt that or undermine that or in any way show that that trust is misplaced, that's when you create a violent situation.
Indeed. And when our leaders fail so horribly, we have such a leadership glut in the United States right now. Where are our Martin Luther King Jr.'s? Where are our Bobby Kennedys? And I'm not putting those people particularly on pedestal. I'm just saying, at a time of civil rights, those were leaders back then. Where are our leaders nowadays?
Oh, they are on the street.
Exactly. And so they are there. We are the leaders. We, the people, are the leaders. We are the grassroots leaders in the ground. And so, Tucker Carlson, you can call authentic democratic leadership people who are fighting to regain trust in the social contract as rioters, anarchists, and looters. And that just proves how you, as a leader, are part of the problem. Our, Mayor Lovely Warren, supposed to be a leader, saying that these protesters are outside agitators. Chief Singletary lying about the RPD's, handling of the case. Donald Trump with an endless litany of disgusting failures on leadership, I mean, we're living through tough times in the United States. And it's because our leaders have failed us, our social contract has been broken, and society is not looking out for the interests of people, it's looking out for self-interests. Whether it's money or greed, personal profit, or the badge, it's a broken social contract. And that's why people are in the streets. And so that's why we have a lot of work to do to make sure that, much can change in our society. Because it needs to. It's untenable. It's literally untenable, right? Like it's literally nihilistic to think of, continuing to, for instance, elect Republicans who don't believe in climate change. It's literally extinction, and so things must change. They will eventually. Change is inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, either things change or we all die.
Yeah, no, I mean, literally, yeah.
That's change, too. So.
Right, yeah. I mean, just like how people...
thought I'd make it clear.
Just like how people become calm when you suffocate them. They certainly change. It's like, it's just, things need to change, and hopefully they can change in a way that it's this simple. Treat other people the way you want to be treated. And so, when it comes to criticizing police, I want to say that no institution is immune from criticism. I do not envy the job that police officers have. I have worked in jobs that required me to be a first responder to situations, and I hated it. I knew I wasn't the person for the job. That's why I'm not doing it anymore. Super stressful, super anxiety inducing, not for me. I'm glad there are people out there who want to do that stuff, but they got to be the right people to do that stuff. They got to be people who want to treat other people the way they want to be treated.
And they have to be in a structure that is not violent.
Yeah, one that produces, social justice and human rights more so than anything else. Coal miners out there, I critique coal miners because we shouldn't be mining coal anymore. So
coal companies.
Coal companies, right, yeah. Sorry, it's nothing against you. It's just we need to change these institutions. And change is natural and fine, and it's okay as part of the social contract. We do have to wrap up our hour here, though. Thank you for tuning in and joining us as we endeavor to create a better social contract on 100.9 FM WXIR. This was Evidence of Design. We're back on Saturdays from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Stay in tune with us through our social medias at Radio EOD. Up next is the Esquire Hour. Craig and John always put on a great show. Stay tuned for them, and thanks for tuning in to your extreme independent radio station in Rochester, 100.9 FM, WXIR. I was your host, Jason Taylor, joined by good friends and co-hosts Matt Treadwell.
So long.
And Mary Lawrence.
Have a good one.
Until then, be well, be safe,
wear
take care, wear a mask, and bye-bye. Stay in touch with us throughout the week by giving us a Facebook or a Twitter at Radio EOD. Those are handles, Radio EOD. And you can email us throughout the week at radioeod@gmail.com. I was your host, Jason Taylor, joined by my good friend and co-host, Mary Lawrence.
Enjoy the fireworks.
And our normal co-host, Matt Treadwell, he is in our thoughts. Until next time, be well, be safe, take care,